Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. Today we're talking about a very, very significant rifle. In fact, probably one of the most significant rifles of the global war on terrorism. What we're going to be talking about today is the Knights Armament M110 SASS, or semi-automatic sniper system. It was significant in many ways. First off, it changed probably the sniper's outlook on bolt action versus semi-automatic. For all those years prior to, if you were to have a sniper rifle, it had to be bolt action. That was it. It had to be 30-06, 308, 300 Win Mag. There was no, quote, sniper who would accept a semi-automatic because they had to be, less accurate. Well, when you look at the M21, for instance, yeah, you can see where they would say that. However, with the introduction of first with the introduction of the Mark 11 for the U.S. Navy and SOCOM, they were the first ones to look at the semi-automatic sniper system or something similar, which was also based off of the Armalite AR-10 or, at this point, the SR-25 system. So we're going to go back quite a ways because a lot of this stuff starts off back in the 50s, and a lot of it happens also in the 90s as well. But nothing really came to fruition with it really until the onset of the global war on terror. So we're going to go back to the late 50s, early 50s with the NATO trials for ammunition standardization. NATO wanted to standardize on one particular cartridge that would be common for all the NATO countries, so they'd be able to support each other on battle, resupply, and so forth. And the cartridge that was chosen was the 7.62 by 51 millimeter, or the 308 Winchester, which, if you go back in some of my other videos, you'll see, which I felt was a mistake. The 280 British was a far more realistic option, I felt, in that. And at the same time, the 7.62 by 51 was adopted. The FNFAL grew to be, as we refer to as the right arm of the free world that was used by most of the countries. Of course, the United States, they departed from that with a very corrupt system. They adopted the T-44, or the what we know now as the M14, which is the shortest service life of any U.S. service rifle in our history, with less than 6 years that it was actually produced. But we'll be getting more into the M14 and the M21 coming up. The rifle that Armalite came up with was the AR-10, which you see right here is the BRN-10, which is very similar to the Portuguese version of the rifle. It was advanced. It was like nothing anybody had ever seen. You had aluminum receivers. You had synthetics that were used. You had a different operating system that was a custom. Usually they're used to using external piston type systems, such as the M14 or M21. This used what's referred to as an internal piston or a direct gas impingement system. By not having the heavy external piston, you didn't impede as much on the harmonics of the barrel, which it certainly increased accuracy. And the way the rifle was made, it was known for its accuracy. You know that the U.S. Ordnance Corps was determined that this was not going to make it. They wanted to protect their T-44 or their homegrown M14. The M14 was tradition. It was traditional steel and wood. It was a traditional M1 Garand type design. The U.S. military was used to the M1. They had those were being pumped out of U.S. arsenals as well as some private, but the majority of the rifles were produced at Springfield Armory. And at the end of that testing, unfortunately, the T-44 was adopted, and even worse, the AR-10 was basically tossed into the scrap heaps of the U.S. Ordnance Corps. The AR-10 would go on to have some interest overseas, and it would go into production over in Holland, or the Dutch artillery in Richtingen. But it was very, very limited, and it would eventually go out of production completely. Very, very few were ever made. So the role of the DMR rifle towards the end of the Vietnam War with the adoption of the M16 fell on the M14, which, of course, the M14 was the only rifle we had in inventory that was 7.62, and they wanted a heavier caliber for longer range shooting. Now, the M14, or the M21 basically is an M14. It's accurized. They had a scope to it, and they may or may not modify the trigger to give you a better trigger. Also may modify the stock to make it more of a glass-bedded type, or in its own version, or free-floating. The rifle was used as a DMR rifle right up through pretty much the global war on terror, and it was still. Now, as the time went on during the Vietnam War and into the 80s and even into the early 90s, the traditional role of a sniper rifle was still bolt action. There was benefits to having a semi-automatic rifle such as the M14, but the M14 just was not it. It didn't have a lot of the characteristics that they were looking for accuracy, for reliability, and also for longevity. A rifle that you didn't have to have a full-time gunsmith to keep it running. In 1991, Lieutenant Colonel David Lutz was at Quantico, Virginia. He was very much involved with the small arms for the Marine Corps. He put out a requirement that was referred to as the SSTN, or the Sniper Support Team Weapon. He was serving as a program manager for infantry weapons in Quantico, Virginia. And the purpose of this program was to restart the DMR program that existed many, many years before. The SSTW was an attempt to restart the DMR program, which was originally based on the M14, which it could not perform requirements needed by the Fleet Marine Force requirements. The requirements were totally off whack for as far as what the Marine Corps wanted. The M14 or the M21 did not meet any of those criteria. And they were, the whole program lacked objectivity, which is really a surprise considering the way that the rifle was adopted in the 50s. Complete lack of objectivity. And, of course, they were trying to make the rifle do something it wasn't designed for. Now, at this current time, if you were to look at what was going on, the M16A2 was basically the SSTW. It was a sport weapon for the M40A1. The M16A2 was accurate out to 400 to 500 yards very, very easily. But they wanted a new rifle that was going to be more so accurate out to about 600 yards. Now, some of the requirements that they have for this rifle were they wanted it to have the ammo interchangeability with the M40A1. They wanted to have the ability to mount an optic in line with the shooter's eye, as well as to have a suppressor. And again, it must not be a full-time gunsmith required to keep the thing running. Anybody who's familiar with the M14 and the M21, every few thousand rounds you had to have it looked at by a gunsmith. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Lutz knew where there was about 5 artillery Richtigen AR-10 rifles at Picatinny Arsenal. So he went down there and he picked out the best of the 5. One to do basically some beta testing on. So with this rifle on temporary loan, he went and he decided to make some changes because you had all the requirements that were originally had. First, you want to deal with the ammunition interchangeability. All right, we had a 7.62 rifle. Ability to mount a suppressor. Well, that rifle, he had sent the upper receiver off to Phil Seeberger at OpSync to have a suppressor mounted to it. For as far as the requirement for mounting the optic, what Lieutenant Colonel Lutz does is he cut off the carrying handle and the charging handle and mounted a weaver rail to the top of the receiver. It was pretty much welded in place. It wasn't what you would call an integrated flat top, but it was one of the first attempts. Probably one of the first attempts you saw at a flat top upper receiver was during the Vietnam War. There was a model there that was developed by Hank Tatro that had a rail on top of it. A little bit different from this, but still similar. This also predated the 1913 rail also, but you put in the weaver rail. What that allowed you to do is it gave you a direct line of sight from your eyes right into the optic, unlike an M16A2, where you had the carrying handle that sat up this high, then up here's where the scope would be. So it was a very uncomfortable position for somebody's neck. Some additional things that were done to the A&I rifle were they sort of modernized it like it with some M16A2 components. They used M16A2 handguards, M16A2 pistol grip, and a M16A2 type stock. That was one of the things that was nice about the artillery Richtigen AR-10 design was you had some commonality in part between that and the M16A2, so you could take some of those updated components. When I talked to Dave Lutz, he said he recalled that when he was out testing this rifle, his general was out there along with an officer from the Australian Army. The Australian general decided he wanted to fire it, he fired it, and offhand he was hitting targets from 1 to 200 yards right off the bat. And that Australian officer told that general that this is the most accurate rifle he's ever fired. And immediately at that point, the general told Dave Lutz that you've got yourself a weapons program. Unfortunately, once again, tradition took over. The military, Army, Marines, well, in this case the Marines, was just not ready for a semi-automatic rifle. To them, it still had to be a bolt-action rifle to have that kind of accuracy. Even though during the testing of the AR-10 in the 50s, one of the Armalite executives had noticed that there was one of the testers wrote down in his notebook that the Armalite AR-10 was the most accurate semi-automatic rifle he ever fired. But of course, that didn't wind up in the final reports because our Ordnance Corps did not want it. The higher ups wanted to stay with their T-44 or our current M14. Now we're going to move forward to 1990. In the early 1990s, Gene Stoner, he went to work with Reunited Knights Armament Company, and his whole purpose there was to redesign or redevelop and modernize his AR-10 design. Now, the rifle that they were to design was not going to be based off of the original prints. It was going to be based off of a more modernized one that would have a good parts commonality with the M16A2. And the rifle that was designed is the one that you see here. This is the original SR-25 match rifle. SR is Stoner Rifle 25, is adding the 10 from AR-10 and the 15 from AR-15 and getting 25. This particular rifle was purchased in January of 1995, and I actually purchased this from Gene Stoner at SHOT Show 1995. I didn't know much about the rifle at the time. I was only like 22 years old, but all I knew was he was the one that designed it, and I didn't care what it was. I was going to have one. And it took me until, I believe, June June of '95 to actually get it because of the ones that were on back order. The rifle, just because of the fact that he designed it, it did very well. This whole project was funded through commercial sales that eventually would go into military and pretty much would stay there for quite a few years. So the rifle that we see here, this is somewhat modified. You're seeing a photograph right now of the original rifle. But some of the changes that were done to this rifle were the stock. I replaced the stock. It originally came with an M16A2 stock. I replaced it with a PRS. And I also replaced the handguard. The original handguard it was a carbon fiber free-floated handguard. And this particular handguard is the URX. Now, I never intended this to be a collector's rifle. I intended this to be a rifle that I would use. So I pretty much modified it to make it, that much better. I also changed out a new bolt catch, a new magazine release, and ambidextrous safety. So I did make some changes to it. But talking a little bit about the design, the original design was built around the original AR-10 magazine. Now, the original AR-10 magazine, there was not very many of those made because the rifle was in very limited production. In fact, some of the first SR-25 match rifles that came out were even issued with these type magazines until Knights went ahead and built their own right before the assault weapon ban, which are basically a steel magazine that was a little more resemblance to a modern day 20-round AR magazine, but this was steel, very, very well made. But unfortunately, there was only a handful of these that were made before the assault weapon ban. When I bought this, I was able to get 3 magazines. That was the maximum that I could get, which is what I did. So talking about the rifle, we're going to go from the muzzle front because there's a lot of things that make this rifle very, very unique, especially when it first came out. First off is a 24-inch barrel, which is a 5R rifling right-hand twist. Now, this barrel blank is an actual barrel blank from Remington for their M40 rifle. Knights Armament is the only company that they ever sold a barrel blank to. So you're having the exact same barrel on the SR-25 that you had on your M40 sniper rifle. The original one had a gas block that was held in place by a lock nut on the front, and then it was changed to what you see here, which is a drilled and pinned front sight base, which you see here with a 1913 rail on the top of it. You got a rifle-length gas system. Now, the way this barrel was designed, the lead was designed so when it would chamber a 168 grain or M118 cartridge, that the lance and grooves would almost touch the ogive of the bullet. And that was designed specifically for the M118 and later on M118LR. So if you were to put anything else in this, there's a good chance you could blow primers and you'd have a much higher pressure. Now, you could always send this rifle into Knights at that time, and they would make some modifications in the chamber so it would take pretty much any cartridge. But the one that had this type of a chamber that was specifically for the M118, this one was guaranteed to deliver less than or equal to 1 MOA at 100 yards. In fact, you're seeing also a photograph of the target that came with this rifle. Every rifle that was sold, even to this day, came with a target. And that target would verify that this was test fired and it shot sub MOA. And you'll see mine was like 0.88 something. I don't recall offhand what it was. But it was definitely sub MOA. And as this rifle's gotten a little bit broken in, this has only hit about 600 rounds through it. But it's now well under 1/2 MOA. You'll be seeing some targets as well from this one. So looking at the upper and lower receiver, the upper was made from an extrusion, a 775 T6 aircraft aluminum, and the lower receiver was made from a forging. Now, as you can see, there is a fire cartridge case deflector on here. Because this was made from an extrusion, you couldn't machine it onto it, so this was added to the 1913 rail and held in by a set screw. And as you will see, there is no forward assist. As this rifle was developed in the 50s, it was never meant to have a forward assist. The Gene Stoner had said, in fact, he testified in front of the congressional hearings, the ICHORG congressional hearings in 1968, that he felt that a forward assist was a bad idea, that you never want to force a round into the chamber, and he felt that it would cause more problems than it would ever solve, and I think he was correct. Knights Armament, when he developed the SR-25, he kept to that original. Now, when you look at the bolt carrier group on here, which we'll take a look at, you'll see it's chrome-plated, but we're going to take that in a minute. So the lower receiver, it had basically a sunken-in magazine release, so it wouldn't unintentionally release. The trigger mechanism on here, it takes a standard AR-15 M16 type trigger mechanism. However, due to the way that the bolt carrier is cut underneath, you have to use a very narrow match type hammer. A standard GI type hammer would not fit. We'll take a look at it underneath when we take it apart. Standard A2 pistol grip. Now, the original buffer that came in this thing was actually a plastic spring guide, which was relatively quickly changed into a regular buffer because you would get excessive bolt carrier bounce. You have the rear sight on here, which is a standard Knights Armament rear sight, which is adjustable for elevation and windage. Now, on the original one, you had a front sight that would mount onto the front sight base. This is because it's a URX. This has a folding front sight base. But this was something that was added later. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at some of the internal components. The SR25 has 60% parts commonality with the M16A2. Some of these parts here I have changed. I'll go over what I actually have changed. First thing I did change was the bolt catch. The bolt catch you see here is the current production one. It's much stronger. The original SR25 had a standard M16A2 bolt catch. The problem with that was that it was not designed to halt it at this very heavy, heavy mass 308 bolt carrier. They did have some issues with those breaking, so the part was replaced eventually with a dedicated 7.62 version of the bolt catch. Next thing I changed out was the magazine release. This one here is an ambidextrous. I do like to tend to go around like this and from the front to pull out my magazine, so I did change that out as well. As far as the safety was concerned, I also did put on a ambidextrous safety. Now we're going to take a look at the trigger here. The trigger that originally came with the SR25 was a Knights-produced two-stage match trigger, as you can see right here. Now, as you can also see, this is a relatively narrow trigger compared to the standard M16A2. If you look at the bottom of the bolt carrier, the opening in here where the hammer was to strike the firing pin was relatively narrow as well. What this did was it prevented you from being able to put any other trigger in here that was not of this same profile. So say you had a problem with this trigger mechanism and you wanted to put in a standard semi-automatic only, you wouldn't be able to because the hammer would be too wide for it to be able to go into the bottom of the bolt carrier. And as we previously stated as well, the buffer, this is a current production buffer. The original one was a white plastic spring guide. We'll take a look at the bolt carrier. Now, the bolt carrier is chrome plated. That's something that Gene Stoner had always done. He had the original AR-10s had chrome plated bolt carriers, the original AR-15s, as well as the early Colt 901s, as well as the XM16E2s. One of the vast improvements that was made to this bolt carrier group was the fact that it has a captive firing pin retaining pin. So you push rearward or push inward. This will open up as so. And we drop that right down. And we have your firing pin. Push the bolt in. Drop that right out. And you have your cam pin. And you pull forward and you have a magnetic particle and proof tested bolt. As you can see, we're also chrome plated. There's three different types of bolts that you're going to find. First, this is the first original AR-10 bolt. There's on the SR-25, you'll see has a round similar to an M16 type ejector. Type 2, as you're going to see in the photograph, as well as the Type 3. The Type 2 has a modified ejector, which is modified to make it longer, so you can insert a longer spring that's identified by having a brass-colored ejector. It's a much stronger ejector spring. And then the current one you're going to see on the M110 is you're going to see dual ejectors. You push out like so. We have the extractor. Now this is also the newer extractor. The original extractor was chrome plated as such. It had a much less strong extractor spring, but it was interchangeable as well. And the claw on here on the extractor is much more aggressive than the original one, and it was more durable as well. And this was also made in black, so you'd be able to differentiate between the original ones and the newer ones, which is why you have that color coding on there. On the original SR-25 bolts, you had the standard 3 beer can gas rings. You have a much more durable 2 gas ring, which is far more durable and lasts a lot longer than the standard beer can type gas rings. Reassembly, just drop in like so. Drop in. Make sure your extractor is on the right. The charging handle I put on this is a PRI gas buster. This is not what it came with. I just like it because the latch is a lot bigger and it's easier to grab onto with a scope on here. Shown here is the original AR-10 magazine from the 1950s, and shown here is the later production Knights Armament SR-25 steel magazine. And of course, all this predates the PMag and everything that you see today. But these were the original 2 magazines. You know, these magazines were good, but they were not nearly as durable as these steel ones that you see today. And these are sort of a collector's item right now, too. Now, Knights Armament would go, as you know, has a very big relationship with SOCOM, with the U.S. military. And they had the influence to get the SR-25 looked at by SOCOM. SOCOM immediately saw the benefits of the SR-25 design, and they adopted what's referred to as the Mark 11 sniper rifle. It wasn't until 40 years after the original AR-10 was introduced that the rifle would finally see its U.S. military service. In May of 2000, the U.S. SOCOM has adopted the SR-25 as the Mark 11 sniper rifle. The rifle had some changes that were made to it, as you're going to see some of the photographs that are coming up right now. You're going to see that the suppressor was mounted by a locking gate. You have a longer suppressor. There was no flash hider on it. You had the addition of the URX rail instead of the carbon free float. You have a standard A2 stock on it. And you have a couple different generations for as far as the upper receiver. You have the original extrusions, and then you get into the forgings, which have the cartridge case deflector machined into it. And the rifle was designed specifically around the M118 LR ammunition for longer range. Now, the barrels on the earlier ones were 20 inches, 1 11-inch twist, and that barrel was made by Obermeyer. The original SR-25 matches were the only ones that utilized the Remington 5R M40 barrel blanks, but the barrel was made by Obermeyer. Except for the QD sound suppressor, the handguard was 11.35 inches, quad mil standard 1913 rail, and it had a M16A2 pistol grip as well as the stock. Loophole Variax mil-dot scope, 3.5 to 10. Military tends to like on their sniper rifles a 10 power scope. A Harris bipod, and it weighed about 15.3 pounds. The Mark 11 served very well with SOCOM. It was very, very well received. And it was about time now for the regular Army to get away from their traditions to start looking at the benefits of having a semi-automatic sniper rifle. Now, some of the issues that come up are precision accuracy. Now, when you were to compare the accuracy of a M110 or an SR-25, my SR-25 match rifle has bolt-action accuracy. You see groups that are under 1/2 MOA at 800 yards. So when you start getting into that degree of accuracy, there is very, very little benefit to having a bolt-action over a semi-automatic. If you look at the benefits of the semi-automatic rifle, you have the ability to engage multiple targets relatively quickly. You can probably engage targets 2 to 3 times faster. Consider you have a 20-shot magazine versus a 5-shot magazine on an M40, A1, or an M24. The only rifle that was out there in use was the M21, which was based off of the M14. Now, when you were to compare the M21 to this, there is literally no competition. This rifle shoots rings around the M21. Also, the fact that the M21 and M14, for all you guys who talk about how wonderful it is for a competitive rifle, it's a very accurate rifle when the barrel's cold. However, once this barrel heats up, maybe 2 magazines or so, 3 magazines or so, you start seeing a consistent shift in its point of impact to the left. As barrel gets warmer and warmer and warmer, it just migrates further and further to the left, as you're going to see from the target we're showing you now. The M110, with the exact same amount of magazines, 3 magazines through it, it still remains point of aim, point of impact. For as far as durability is concerned, the M110 does not require a full-time gunsmith. You have a true free-floated barrel. You have a true match-grade barrel. By having this being free-floated, you don't have any of that heavy piston system that interfere with the harmonics on the barrel. You also have, as far as your backup sights are either going to be part of the handguard or part of the front sight base, where you have the M14 as part of the flash suppressor, so that messes up a lot of your accuracy as well from the barrel, just shifting from differences in heat. You also have, as far as recoil, you have less recoil with the M110. It's inline recoil. You also have a much better trigger, a much, much better trigger. You have a much easier magazine that's straight in place, and plus you have all the human engineering of the AR-15 M16 series, where you have an easily accessible magazine release, safety, as well as bolt catch. And you had the ability to put suppressors on it with no issue, easily optics. There was really no comparison. Now, many people want to talk about the fact that, well, the M14 is so good that it's still in use today. I do want to address that. First off, the M14 is the only rifle that we have in inventory in 7.62 NATO. It goes back to the Vietnam era. There's a reason for that. That rifle was so out of date from its inception that we couldn't even give that rifle to any of our allies. Nobody wanted it. In fact, the only military that ever used it was Taiwan, and they manufactured it themselves, called a T-57, for a very, very brief period. This was a rifle that we could not give away. The Vietnamese didn't want it. Nobody wanted it. So those rifles remained in our inventory. So when the time came for the global war on terror, when there was an immediate need, especially in Afghanistan, for a longer range rifle, the M14 was available. It was in our inventory. They could pull those out of inventory and put them right into service without having to go through an entirely new weapons program. So the M14 is there out of convenience, not out of quality in what it is. It's simply there. It's the same thing that happened with the Brits during Gulf War I. They were having issues with their SA-80s engaging targets at longer range, so they brought out their FNFALs. Did they bring those out because they were a superior rifle to anything else that was out there? No, it was what they had in their inventory. And still to this day, when there's a shortage of these, you will still see the M21s because it's very easy for them to go into war stock, pull out an M14, throw a scope on it, maybe do a little bit of work on the trigger, and to issue it. In order for the military to have a proper rifle, they have to go through an entire weapons replacement program, which is what you see here with the M110. I can't think of anybody who I've ever spoke to, and I've spoken to a lot of military snipers out there who would prefer an M21 over an M110. It just didn't happen. The M110 has been very, very well received due to the fact that it's based on an AR-15 weapons platform, or basically the AR-15 is based off of it. You're right at home when you drop in from an M16 to this. Everything is the same. Your manual of arms is the same. Your assembly is the same. It's all there. So we're going to go on to a little bit of the development of the M110. Again, finally, the Green Army recognized the benefits of having a semi-automatic rifle. It was demonstrated many, many times where you would have multiple targets. You would have a guy with one of these and a guy with a bolt-action rifle, and you could see the amount of time that it would take to manually cycle that action and then to regain your sight picture, where with this one here, you'd be able to fire, and you didn't really have to recover from it at all. Your scope was still on the target, so you could rapidly engage the targets. In September 2005, there was the XM10 competition took place. You had rifles from Armalite, from Knights Armament, from JP Enterprises, DPMS, and Remington. The two finalists, from my knowledge, or from my understanding anyways, was the JP Enterprises and the Knights. And what really knocked out the JP was their failure to drill and pin the front sight base. During the durability part of the testing, the front sight base migrated forward and the gas shut off on the JP, immediately knocking that out. Now, I'm not sure if there was additional things on top of that that caused it a problem, but I do, it was something very, very simple that knocked JP out of there. And without a question, Knights was the only one standing. And also the knowledge that, the Knights has made this rifle for SOCOM for quite some time. The rifle's been very tried, very proven, and it's served very, very well. In May and June of 2007, Operation Testing began at Fort Drum, New York. Fort Drum, New York is a great place to test for Arctic conditions as well as temperate conditions. April 2008, the M110 first saw its combat with the U.S. forces at Task Force Fury in Afghanistan. The rifle did exactly what it was supposed to do. It enabled them to engage targets that were at further distances than you could engage with a 5.56 by having two or three of these with any unit. Provide them with a long-range precision where they were able to engage targets that were out of range. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the M110 from front to back and see sort of the evolution from the original rifle into what we see right now. Starting in the front, we have a flash suppressor on here, and in the back here we have a mount for a QD Knights Armament suppressor. Now, probably the one negative thing about this rifle is the fact that the suppressor is absolutely so long because it comes out quite a distance. But this is put on with a simple locking gate. You don't have to use any tools or anything. It's just a simple locking gate to put it down. We have a drilled and pin front sight base, and we do have the 1913 rail on the front. So if you were to want to put your iron sights on here for more precision iron sights, it's much better to have your iron sights attached to the barrel than it is anything else, because it will actually follow with the change in the harmonics of the barrel. But you also have a foldable front sight. If you take a look, you'll see the front sight when it's in the folded position. It's part of the 1913 rail, and when it's up, it locks in place. The original ones didn't lock in place, but the complaint was, obviously, if this was to hit something and it didn't lock, you would have it disengaged. So you'll see it's adjustable from a dial here instead of the standard M16 type detent, and you're rotating the front sight post. When you look down here, we'll see the attachment of the Harris bipod. This is a Knights Armament mount, which bolts directly to the 1913 rail. And this enables you to have it much larger if need be. So depending on how you were sitting, so this gave you that ability to raise that. Now close here, you'll be able to see the Knights URX. As you can see, it's quad mill standard 1913 rail. And you also see that we have Knights rail protector panels on the 3, 6, and 9 o'clock positions where you can grip a hold of that. And of course, we see that this is Coyote 10. That was a part of the requirement as well. The scope on here is a Leupold. It's a 10 power. And another difference between the Mark 11 and the M110 is the Mark 11 used swan throw lever rings, where this one here uses a one-piece Knight's Armament ring. And this is also illuminated. You'll see we have the folding rear sight, which is adjustable for windage and elevation as well. Now looking at the receivers, what we're going to see here is we see a forging on the upper and a forging on the lower. You'll see that the ejection port dust cover is there, and you'll see that the fart cartridge case deflector is part of the receiver itself. Now we get down into the lower receiver. Here we're going to see the standard magazine release, and then we're going to go up here and we have a bolt release. Now this is a bolt release, not a bolt catch. So if you wanted to lock the bolt open to the rear, you would have to depress it from the left-hand side. But see that we're in the open condition, the bolt's in the open condition. When you hit that, it releases forward. And again, now if I wanted to lock it open, I have to push from the left-hand side for it to open up. So again, bolt release, not a bolt catch. We have the ambidextrous safety on here, a standard A2 type pistol grip, and the trigger on here, we'll take a look at the inside, is a two-stage match trigger. The stock, as you see, is basically an A2 type stock with two QD points on it. You have an adjustable butt pad on here to further adjust. You have a side folding sling swivel on the bottom. When we look at the charging handle, you have a tactical latch on the side, and we're going to be taking a little closer look at this charging handle as well. Here, a close-up of the M110 charging handle. You can see the tactical latch you have on here. Now, this is not the U.S. military charging handle. The U.S. military charging handle has some similarities to the PRI gas buster, where it addresses the issue by groove that's cut in here, that the gas from when it's suppressed. This will give it a path that will eject out the side rather than hit the shooter in the face. You also have some wings down on here. But this is more of a commercial charging handle. Now we're going to take a look at the evolution in bolts. The top bolt we have here is the original SR25 bolt carrier, and the bottom one down here is the current issue M110. What we're going to notice here, first off, is we're going to see the notice of these sand grooves. This was an engineering change they were able to get forward due to the fact that they were in the desert, and it certainly made a difference. As you can see, we have three gas ports here and one right here, same here. And if you also notice on the bottom, they have not changed. They still utilize the same narrow hammer. That can't be used for anything other than the hammer that comes with it. For as far as bolts are concerned, we're going to see some differences right now. This is the original, which has a standard M16 type ejector. This is the Type 3, and this Type 3 utilizes two ejectors. The two ejectors is mostly good when you're using a short barrel. It helps get that cartridge case out of there quicker. These both have the updated extractors. Now the Type 2, as you saw from the photograph, is one you have. It's a brass-colored ejector that's larger, and the hole that's drilled in deeper so you can use a larger spring, and the ejector is a lot more durable, and you'll see here as well. Now you'll see some modifications to the bolt as well, as you see here. This is much more strong, more beefy. You're looking at a good 20 years of refinement between these two as well. So that's the bolt carriers. Now we take a look at the receiver, lower receiver. As you can see, when you have the bolt in the catch position, you'll see how that works as a bolt release only. If you want it to engage, you have to hit from the left-hand side. And we also see a two-stage trigger. This is an excellent two-stage trigger. It's probably only about 4 pounds once you get to the second stage. Breaks very, very, very clean. You do have an ambidextrous safety. Let's take a look at the buffer. You'll see we utilize standard weights in here. And as I previously mentioned, the original one used a white polymer spring guide. It's not a buffer. As far as a buffer, that's a buffer where you have weights in it. A spring guide is a solid piece of plastic. So this was definitely an upgrade. Again, looking more at the obvious on the upper receiver, you have a continuous 1913 rail from front to rear, but this is two pieces. But however, the way this thing locks in place, it ensures that you have a continuous rail, so if you were to mount any kind of optic further of this, it would still be returned to zero. And you can see that you have some screws on here that enables you to remove the lower handguard for cleaning and for maintenance. And for reassembly, it's like any other AR-15 M16 type rifle. The M110 has been very, very successful. For as far as the operational use of this rifle, it has been very, very well accepted, and it had replaced a good number of the bolt-action rifles that are still in inventory. Now, you'll never get rid of the bolt-action rifles. There are several snipers out there who will still, no matter what you show them, how good the technology is, they're going to remain with the tradition of the bolt-action rifle. The SASS rifle engaged at least 3 times faster than you could with a bolt-action rifle. That's definitely without doubt. You have a very minimal difference in combat accuracy. A lot of the benefits you'll see out of the bolt-action rifle really won't give you that much of a benefit for as far as hitting human solar targets out to reasonable ranges, out to say 700-800 yards. It's not that much of a benefit. Also, with the addition of the sound suppressor on the M110, one of the things that was very interesting about both the M110 and the Mark 11 is when you were to replace the sound suppressor, it did not shift the point of aim or the point of impact. Where a lot of times, a lot of different sound suppressors, that's something that you will see. I have my silencer co-suppressors, and I definitely see a difference in the point of aim, point of impact when I add the suppressor to it. There's also very minimum maintenance for as far as working on this rifle. This is as simple as working on an AR-15 M16. There's no special tools really required other than just for the handguard. Everything else is done with drift punches. You have standard gauges. The rifle is very, very easy to maintain compared to the bolt-action rifles, and especially compared to the M21. The ammunition in this thing was designed to be optimal with was the M118 and M118 LR. The M118 is a 168 grain OTM, or they can also be a full metal jacket boat tilt. The M118 LR is a 175 grain OTM, which is probably the most popular round that's being used today. We had the lab radar out with this rifle as well, and we tested some different loads in it to see what we were getting for velocity. The Black Hills M118 LR 175 grain OTM, 2,537 feet per second. The Federal 175 grain gold medal, 2,520 feet per second. And the SIG 175 grain OTM was 2,547 feet per second. And at 100 yards, this rifle here, the best grip that I was able to get was the Black Hills ammunition at .810 of diameter, or so 0.810. So we are still well under MOA. This barrel is pretty well used too, so I imagine if we would have gotten to this a little bit earlier in its service life, we probably would have even gotten better. Now, something that this rifle has experienced that most military rifles experience with the U.S. government is trying to get engineering changing orders. Now, there's been over 30 engineering enhancements that Knights Armament is wanting to do with this rifle to improve it for its service with the U.S. military. And unfortunately, the U.S. military is very, very, very difficult to get anything done with. One of the very few changes they were able to get through was the addition of the second ejector. That was one of the ones they were able to get through. But this rifle, could it have been better? Yeah, it could have. Is that Knight's fault? Actually, no. Knights, they, over the years, have learned the things that they could do to improve it. But the U.S. government said no. To the U.S. government and to Picatinny, the best is the enemy of good enough. We can offer them something better, but if it does what they want, they are not interested in making any changes to make it any better. So I definitely would give kudos to Knights for trying to update their rifle, even though they got so much resistance from Picatinny Arsenal. Now, is the day of the M110 done? Not yet. There has been a new program that was initiated in 2012 called the SASS. It was a compact semi-automatic sniper system. Now, Knights put one in for that. It's a very, very similar rifle with a telescopic stock. And unfortunately, the rifle that beat out the M110 was manufactured by H&K. It's an external piston. There's been very little information that's been put out on it. In fact, as of this day, I don't know if they've actually taken possession of any of them yet. After the rifle was adopted, it took quite a bit of time just to get the specifications down for what the rifle was going to be. But as of this date, this rifle is still serving very, very well. What we're going to do now is we're going to take this out to the range and we're going to see how it shoots. As you saw, we saw some footage of both the original SR25 that I have, as well as the M110. And I have to say that the original SR25 match rifle, the one from 1995, outshot the M110. Now, we have to be realistic here. We're also looking at a 24-inch barrel versus a 20-inch barrel. We're looking at a 5R barrel optimized for a 168 grain bullet on the earlier rifle versus one that was using a lot of the 175 grain. And the other thing is, too, is the original rifle, the SR25 match, I clean that barrel after every 10 shots. So we have a very, very babied rifle. But we do have to say that there were sub half MOA groups with the original rifle. Rifles are absolutely pleasant to shoot. They definitely are a credit to Gene Stoner. It's only unfortunate that Stoner could never see that his Tomorrow rifle today, that was shunned by the U.S. military in the 1950s, come to be used by the most elite special operations units in the world today. The AR-10 was ignored, but it came back as the SR-25, Mark 11, and then the M110. And the M110, it saw general military service as a primary sniper rifle. I'm sure he's up there seeing how wonderful his work was. People talk about John Browning, how wonderful he was, and everybody, John Browning's got nothing on Gene Stoner. Gene Stoner has had some of the most iconic designs. He has got the most longest-serving rifle in U.S. military history. Not to mention the precision SR-25 and 110, Mark 11. He deserves the same amount of credit that John Browning or any other designer, such as Kalashnikov, does. Also, for him to see that today that his rifle is the most popular rifle in the U.S. today as a commercial rifle. It's America's rifle. I do want to thank Knights for giving me an opportunity to do a review on this. We've certainly enjoyed shooting it. We do like taking a look at the modern stuff as well. And, I'm not as much of a precision shooter myself, but between me and, as you see, Henry Chan from 9 Hole Review did a lot of the precision shooting. He's much more qualified as a long-range shooter as I am. We both were able to get this rifle to do some absolutely incredible things. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, and even better, share, and please consider becoming a Patreon supporter.